Did someone you love die? She said it quietly, standing alone in front of 47 motorcycles in the most feared motorcycle club in the American Southwest, and the whole town went absolutely still. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. One woman near the diner pressed her hand over her mouth. A man on the sidewalk actually backed into a store doorway and pulled the door shut behind him. And Emily Carter just stood there waiting for an answer. If you're watching this right now, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about this day happened the way anyone expected. Red Creek, Arizona had exactly one traffic light, a gas station that doubled as a bait shop, and the kind of silence on a Tuesday morning that made people feel like the world had forgotten them on purpose. It was the sort of town where everybody knew which truck belonged in which driveway, where the mail carrier's schedule was more reliable than the weather, and where the biggest event in recent memory was when the hardware store caught a small electrical fire and everyone showed up not to watch it burn, but to form a human chain passing buckets from the parking lot. People in Red Creek were good people, careful people, the kind who minded their own business, not out of indifference, but out of a deep generational understanding that the world moved better when you kept your lane and let others keep theirs. Which was exactly why when the sound started at the eastern edge of town at 20 minutes past 9 on a Wednesday morning in late October, it didn't take more than 30 seconds for every person in Red Creek to understand that something had arrived that did not belong to them. It started as a vibration more than a sound, the kind of thing you feel in the soles of your feet before you hear it with your ears. The coffee mugs on the counter of the Red Creek diner trembled slightly. The bell above the diner's front door rattled without being touched. Darlene Hutchins, who had been the morning cook at that diner for 22 years and had seen a great many things roll through Red Creek without flinching, stopped what she was doing with a spatula still in her hand and looked toward the window. "Lord," she said to nobody in particular. They came around the curve on Route 9 in a single column that stretched longer than anyone initially expected, the sound of their engines building from a low growl into something that pressed against your chest and stayed there. 47 motorcycles, black and chrome, moving together with the kind of coordinated weight that announced itself the way weather announces itself, not with a single dramatic moment, but with a slow building certainty that something large was coming and would arrive regardless of whether you were ready. The patches on their leather vests were visible from the sidewalk before the column had even finished clearing the curve. Hell's Angels. People knew the name. Everybody knew the name. Even people who had never been within 300 miles of a motorcycle club knew exactly what those two words meant when they appeared on a patch on the evening news in a conversation dropped to a low voice at a kitchen table. The name carried weight the way certain words always carry weight, not because everyone fully understands the history behind them, but because the history has been told and retold until the weight of it becomes its own kind of truth. Store owners on Main Street reacted within seconds. Carl Briggs at the hardware store reached under his counter and his hand found the telephone. Maggie Doyle at the pharmacy turned her open sign to closed without explaining to the customer standing at her register why she was doing it. Two men sitting outside the barbershop stood up from their chairs, looked at each other once, and went inside. Parents with children made the same calculation instantly and made it without speaking. A woman pushing a stroller crossed the street, walking faster than was quite natural. A man with a little boy on his shoulders stepped off the sidewalk and through the door of the nearest building without even checking what kind of building it was. The motorcycles rolled to a stop in the large lot beside the Red Creek Diner, the only lot in town big enough to accommodate them, and the engines cut off one by one until the silence that followed felt almost louder than the sound that had preceded it. Emily Carter had been working the breakfast shift since 6:30. She was 23 years old with the kind of quiet steadiness about her that people sometimes mistook for shyness until they'd spent 5 minutes in her company and realized it wasn't shyness at all. It was simply a person who listened more carefully than she spoke and who had learned somewhere along the way that most situations revealed their real nature if you gave them 30 seconds before reacting. She had heard the motorcycles from inside the diner. Everyone had. She'd watched through the window as the column pulled in, watched her coworkers trade looks, watched Darlene grip the spatula tighter without realizing she was doing it. And then Emily had looked at the man who climbed off the lead motorcycle, the largest one, the one that had been at the front of the column, and something stopped her. He was somewhere around 50, with gray at his temples and in the close-trimmed beard along his jaw. He was built in the way that some men of that age are built, with a kind of settled, physical weight that comes not from vanity, but from decades of physical work and physical consequence. He wore the vest with the Hell's Angels patch, and his arms were covered in ink that had faded at the edges the way old tattoos do, and he should have looked, by every measure Emily had been raised to apply, like someone you crossed the street to avoid. But he had just climbed off that motorcycle and he was standing beside it, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man arriving somewhere looking for trouble. Emily knew what that looked like. She had grown up around enough of it to recognize it. That was not what she was looking at. What she was looking at was a man who was exhausted down to his bones. A man who was holding himself together with something that was running very close to its limit. A man who was standing in a parking lot in a town he'd never been to, surrounded by his people, and somehow still looked completely profoundly alone. She untied her apron. "Emily," Darlene said her name like a warning. "I'll be right back," Emily said. "Emily, do not." But Emily had already pushed open the diner door. The moment she stepped outside, she felt the shift. The parking lot had that quality that spaces get when a large number of people in them are simultaneously very aware of a single point. Every eye in that lot tracked her as she came through the door and started walking across the asphalt, not because she was doing anything threatening, but because she was doing something no one had expected and no one quite knew how to categorize. She walked at a normal pace. Not too fast, which would have looked like aggression, and not too slow, which would have looked like performance. She walked the way she walked from table to table in the diner when she was carrying something she needed to be careful with. The man at the front, the one who had led the column, noticed her when she was about 15 feet away. The two men standing closest to him noticed her first and moved slightly, not aggressively, but the way people move when they are repositioning to be in a better position to react. The man himself looked at her steadily. He did not move toward her or away from her. Emily stopped about 4 feet away from him. She looked at his face for a moment, really looked at it the way you look at something when you're not performing observation but actually observing, and then she said it. "Did someone you love die?" The question went out into the air of the parking lot and did not come back. It was so specific. That was what struck everyone who was watching from the sidewalk or through windows, who replicated the moment in their memories afterward and tried to explain to each other later what had made it so different from anything they'd expected. It was not a challenge. It was not fear. It was not a greeting designed to diffuse. It was a genuine question asked by someone who had looked at something and formed an assessment and was asking to find out if the assessment was correct. The man with the gray-streaked beard looked at her for a long moment. The two men who had repositioned stood very still. The entire parking lot held. Then the man said, "Yeah." His voice was lower than Emily had expected. Not quiet from restraint, just naturally low, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to carry weight. "I'm sorry," Emily said, and she meant it the way people mean it when they've lost someone themselves and understand what the words actually represent. The man's jaw moved slightly. He looked away for a moment toward the street at nothing in particular, and when he looked back, his eyes were steady, but something around them was not. "We're not here for trouble," he said. "I know, Amo," Emily said. He studied her. "You don't know anything about us." "I know what someone looks like when they're carrying grief," Emily said. "I've had some practice." Something shifted in the man's face, not dramatically, not in a way that would have been visible from a distance. But Emily was 4 feet away and she saw it clearly. It was the specific shift that happens in a person's face when something they said as a deflection or a test lands differently than they expected. When the ground they thought was solid turns out to have a different consistency. "Jack," said one of the men to his right, one of the ones who had repositioned. The word was low, half a question and half a caution. The man Jack held up one hand slightly without looking at the man who'd said his name. The gesture was small and clear. It meant, "I've got this." "My name's Emily Carter," Emily said. "I work in the diner. If you all need food or coffee or somewhere to sit for a while, that's available. No conditions on it." Jack looked at her for another moment. Then Jack Walker. "I know," Emily said. His eyes narrowed slightly, not hostile questioning. "Your name's on the front of your vest," Emily said. He looked down at the small embroidered name tag that was so much a part of the vest he'd essentially stopped seeing it years ago. Then something happened that nobody in that parking lot, perhaps nobody who knew Jack Walker, would have expected. He almost smiled. It didn't fully arrive. It got partway there and stopped because the grief underneath it was too heavy to let it complete the journey. But it got partway there. Fair enough, he said. Wow. Darlene met Emily at the door with an expression that mixed exasperation and terror in roughly equal proportion. What did you just do? Darlene said. I invited them in for breakfast, Emily said. You... Darlene looked past Emily to where the bikers were beginning to move in small groups toward the diner. She looked back at Emily. Your mother raised you with very poor survival instincts. My mother raised me to look at people's faces, Emily said. She picked her apron back up from the counter, retied it, and started pulling menus. The next 20 minutes were the most unusual the Red Creek Diner had experienced in its 40-year history. 47 men spread through the diner and into the parking lot, some sitting at booths and tables, some perched on stools at the counter, some remaining outside. They were not what the diner staff had expected, which is to say they were not what anyone in Red Creek had expected, which is to say they were not the version of themselves that existed in other people's imaginations. They ordered coffee and food with the specific, slightly subdued courtesy of men who were tired and had been traveling and who understood they were guests in a place where they were not entirely welcome. They said please and thank you without being asked to. When two of them moved chairs from one table to another to accommodate a larger group, one of them apologized to Emily for the inconvenience. She told him it was no inconvenience. He nodded and looked away, and she noticed his eyes were red at the rims in the specific way that meant he had either slept badly or cried recently or both. Jack Walker sat alone at a table in the corner with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. Emily came by to refill it. It didn't need refilling, and set the pot down on the table and sat across from him. He looked at her, not threateningly, but it was the look of a man who was deciding something. You always just sit down across from strangers, he said. Only when the strangers look like they need someone to sit across from them, Emily said. He looked at his coffee. We're here for a funeral. Who's? He was quiet for a moment. Man named Michael Brooks. He was one of ours. I'm sorry, Emily said, and again, she meant it. Jack stopped, started again. He was the best of us. That is the only way I know to say it. There were things he did that I'm not going to talk about in a diner in a town I've never been to, but he was a good man. He was a genuinely good man, and there aren't that many of them, and the world is smaller now that he's gone. Emily let that land without trying to fill the space after it. She had learned over years of watching people in moments of loss that the worst thing you could do was rush to comfort. Sometimes you had to let the loss sit in the room for a minute before it would let itself be talked about. He left a list, Jack said finally, things he wanted done after he was gone. Most of them were practical, club business. Some of them were personal. He looked up at Emily. Your name was on the list. Emily went very still. My name, she said. Emily Carter, Red Creek, Arizona. Jack pulled a folded piece of paper from the inside of his vest and set it on the table. He didn't push it toward her, just placed it there between them. He wrote it down a year ago, said to find you when he was gone. Didn't say why, just said your name and this town and that it was important. Emily looked at the paper. Her name was there in handwriting she had never seen before in her life, careful, slightly, slanted the handwriting of someone who had taken their time. I've never heard of Michael Brooks, Emily said. I don't know who he is. I know, Jack said. He knew you wouldn't. The silence that followed that statement was different from the ones that had come before it. It had a different quality, the quality of a door that has just been opened onto a hallway that extends further than you expected. Then why? Emily said. That's what I'm here to figure out, Jack said. The name Michael Brooks meant nothing to Emily Carter. She had turned it over in her mind from every angle available to her during the remainder of the breakfast service, while carrying plates, while refilling coffees, while writing checks, and it had produced nothing. No face, no memory, no half-remembered reference from her mother or from anyone else. It was a name that existed as far as she could tell, in complete isolation from every part of her life. And yet a man she had never met had written her name on a list of final wishes. After the last of the bikers had paid, and they all paid and tipped, and the total came to more than the diner typically made in a full weekday, Emily sat in a booth across from Jack again, and this time he pulled out a photograph. It was old, printed on the kind of paper that photographs were printed on 20 years ago, slightly glossy, with a small white border. In the photograph, a man stood in front of a building Emily didn't recognize. He was younger in the photograph than the age she would have calculated for him based on what Jack had said. He was smiling at whoever was behind the camera, and the smile was genuine, the kind of smile that doesn't know it's being photographed. "That's Michael," Jack said, "about 19 years ago." Emily studied the photograph carefully. The face meant nothing to her. The building behind him meant nothing to her. 19 years ago, she said, thinking out loud. "I would have been 4. Jack watched her. "My mother had a car accident when I was 4, Emily said. It came out evenly because it was a fact she had lived with for long enough that it had lost its jagged edges, had become a piece of her history, the way all history eventually becomes not painless, but incorporated. She was on the highway coming home from the grocery store. A truck ran the light. She was in the hospital for 6 weeks." Jack was very still. "We didn't have insurance," Emily said, "or we had the minimum, which wasn't close to enough. My mother talked about the bills for years. She said she didn't know how we were going to survive them." She paused, and then someone paid them. The words came out slower now because the connection she hadn't seen 10 seconds ago was beginning to arrange itself in front of her. She never knew who, Emily said. She tried to find out. The hospital wouldn't tell her. All they would say was that an anonymous payment had been made in full. She thought it was a mistake for a long time. Then she decided it wasn't a mistake and that whoever had done it didn't want to be found. Jack reached into the inner pocket of his vest again. He produced something smaller, this time a receipt. Old paper, the kind that had gone slightly yellow at the edges. A hospital receipt with the name of a facility Emily recognized because it was the only major hospital within 50 miles of where she had grown up, and at the bottom of the receipt in a payment line, there was a large number and next to it a notation paid in full anonymous. Emily looked at the receipt for a long time. "He paid my mother's hospital bills," she said. The words came out carefully as if she was testing each one for weight before she put it down. "I didn't know he'd done it," Jack said. "He never told me. He never told anyone in the club. I found the receipt in a box of things he left behind, a box he labeled specifically for me with a note that said I'd understand when I found your name in it." "But why?" Emily said. "He didn't know my mother. He didn't know me. I was 4 years old. Why would a man I've never met pay the entire hospital debt for my family?" Jack put both hands flat on the table and looked at her with an expression that meant he was about to say something that cost him something to say. "Because he was there," Jack said. "The accident. He saw it happen. He was on that road on his bike coming the other direction. He saw the truck run the light. He was the one who called the ambulance. He stayed with your mother until the paramedics arrived." He stopped. She was in and out of consciousness. He held her hand so she wouldn't be alone. Emily did not say anything. "She never knew his name," Jack said. "He gave it as Michael when the paramedics asked who had called, but he left before the police arrived. He didn't want—" Jack paused. "He had reasons for staying away from official contact at that time. Good reasons, as it turned out, but I'll get to that. The point is that he never forgot your mother. He checked on her from a distance. When he found out about the bills, he paid them, and he kept the receipt not as evidence but as a reminder." Emily was looking at the table. She was doing the thing that people do when a fact has just fundamentally reorganized the way they understand their own history, the quiet interior work of revision, of going back through things you thought you knew and holding each one up to a new light to see how it changes. "He kept track of me," she said. "Not in a—" Jack chose his words. "Not in a way that was about control or observation. More like the way you might keep track of someone you feel responsible for. From a distance. He knew you were safe. He knew you were doing all right. He didn't insert himself into your life. He just didn't entirely let go of it either." Emily looked up. "Did he know me? Know me as a person as I got older?" "No," Jack said. "Only the broad strokes, that you were well, that you were working, that you were—" his word was resilient. He wrote that in his note. He said she turned out resilient. Emily sat very quietly with that for a moment. She thought about her mother. She thought about the years after the accident, the years of her mother working 2 jobs, the years of watching someone you love hold a life together with the sheer stubbornness of someone who refuses to let it fall apart. And she thought about the medical bills that had simply one day been gone, and the way her mother had never spoken of it as luck. had always spoken of it as something someone chose to do, even though she never knew who. She never knew, Emily said. No, she died not knowing. Jack nodded. Emily was quiet for another moment. When did she die? I don't know that, Jack said. I'm sorry, that wasn't in what he left me. 7 years ago, Emily said. I was 16. She looked at her hands. I've been doing this on my own since then. The diner was quiet around them. Darlene had sent the other staff home, was moving in the kitchen without making much noise, leaving them alone, in the way that some people understand how to leave others alone, present enough to be there if needed, absent enough to not intrude. Michael's last letter to me, Jack said, the one in the box, it said that finding you wasn't about making things right. He said that. He said it wasn't about grand gestures or apologies or explanations. He said he'd done what he could when he could do it, and that was done. But he said, Jack stopped. He looked down at the table and then back up, and his eyes, when they came up, were steadier than they'd been. He said that you'd been on his mind for 20 years and that there was something else you needed to know. Something that wasn't about your family. Something about him, about why he disappeared into the club in the first place. He said that once I found you and you knew who he was, I'd need to tell you the rest. Emily met his eyes. And what's the rest? Jack looked at her steadily. Michael Brooks, before he became one of us, was a federal witness. He saw something that powerful people did not want him to have seen. He documented it. He tried to do the right thing through the right channels, and the right channels nearly got him killed. The air in the diner changed. What did he see? Emily said. Money, Jack said. A great deal of money that was meant for veterans, for men and women who had served and come back with nothing, no support, no benefits, no acknowledgement. There was a fund, a legitimate federal program, and there were contractors and politicians who found a way to redirect it. Not a small amount. We're talking about millions of dollars over nearly a decade. And the people who did it had enough influence to ensure that anyone who tried to expose them would find themselves in a very precarious position. And Michael tried to expose them, Emily said. Michael had the documentation to bring the entire thing down, Jack said. Names, dates, account numbers, the paper trail that would have ended careers and put people in prison. He went to 3 different federal offices with what he had. The first 2 times, whoever he spoke to reported his contact back to the wrong people. Twice he had to run. The second time, he barely made it out. After that, he made a decision. He came to you, Emily said. He came to us, Jack said, because we were the one place in his world that those particular powerful people would not follow. They didn't want visibility. They didn't want their name anywhere near a Hells Angels chapter, even if it was just to investigate a connection. Michael understood that and used it. He spent 5 years gathering more evidence while they assumed he'd disappeared and given up. Emily was very still. And the evidence? She said. What happened to the evidence? Jack held her gaze. That's the part Michael couldn't finish before he died. He had everything. 19 years of documentation, enough to put a dozen people away for the rest of their lives. He stopped. His jaw was tight. He left it hidden, and he left the location of it with a specific instruction, give the location only to Emily Carter. The silence in the diner was absolute. Emily heard her own heartbeat. He didn't tell you, she said. He left an envelope, Jack said, sealed, written on the outside for Emily Carter, to be opened by her alone. Why me? The question came out as barely more than a breath. Of all the people he knew, of everything he'd built over 2 decades, why would he trust this to me? He doesn't know me. I'm nobody to him. I've been asking that since I opened the box, Jack said. And the only answer I've been able to come to is that he trusted you for exactly that reason. You're no one to anyone who might be looking. You have no connection to this. No stake in it that anyone could have predicted or planned around. And he stopped again. What? Emily said. He wrote one more sentence, Jack said. After your name in the letter, he wrote, she's got her mother's eyes and her mother's spine. Emily felt it move through her, not quite grief, not quite recognition, but something that contained elements of both. A stranger who had held her mother's hand in a ditch on a highway 20 years ago, who had never met Emily as a person, but had watched from a distance long enough to form an opinion of her character. A man who had trusted the daughter of a woman he'd once sat beside while she was afraid and alone, because in some deep, probably irrational part of himself, he had simply believed in her. "What's in the envelope?" she said. "I don't know," Jack said. He reached into his vest one more time and set it on the table. A plain white envelope sealed with her name written on the front in the same careful, slightly slanted handwriting she'd already seen once that morning. Emily looked at it. The envelope was thicker than she expected. Whatever was inside had weight. She reached out and picked it up, and the front door of the diner opened. Not a customer, not someone looking for a table. A man Emily didn't recognize in a suit that was wrong for Red Creek on every count, too pressed, too deliberate, too purposeful, who swept the room with a single practiced glance, landed on Emily, and then landed on the envelope in her hand. His expression didn't change, but his hand moved to his jacket. Across the table from her, Jack Walker had already moved out of his chair between Emily and the door with a speed and a precision that had nothing theatrical in it and everything practical. Behind her, she heard the sound of chairs moving and men rising throughout the diner without a word being spoken. Communication happening in the specific language of people who have trained themselves to respond as a unit. The man in the suit looked at Jack. Jack looked at the man in the suit. "Wrong place," Jack said. His voice was flat and quiet and entirely without drama. The man in the suit held very still for 5 full seconds. Then he turned and walked back out the door. Emily looked at the envelope in her hand. Her hand was not entirely steady. From beside her, Jack said without turning, "Put that somewhere safe." Emily looked up at him. Who was that? Jack's eyes stayed on the diner's front window, tracking the man in the suit as he walked back to a car Emily couldn't quite see. That, Jack said, is why Michael left this to someone no one was watching. Emily looked at the sealed envelope with her name on it in a dead man's handwriting and understood fully, completely, and without any remaining room for doubt, that the question she'd asked 47 strangers in a parking lot an hour ago had opened a door she was not going to be able to walk back through. She tucked the envelope inside her apron. Her hand steadied. The man in the suit had been gone for 4 minutes when Jack's phone rang. He looked at the screen, then stepped to the far corner of the diner to take the call. Emily watched him from across the room, watched the way his shoulder blades pulled together when whoever was on the other end started talking, watched the stillness that came over him. That was the opposite of calm, the stillness of a man receiving information he doesn't like and processing it without allowing himself to react visibly. He came back to the table 30 seconds later. "They know you exist," he said. Emily kept her voice even. "Who's they?" "The men whose names are in whatever Michael left you." Jack pulled his chair around to her side of the table, sat closer than before, lowered his voice. That wasn't a random scout. He was confirmation. Someone sent him to verify that Michael's contact had been made. Now they know it has. "How fast does that matter?" Emily said. "It already matters," Jack said. "The question is what you do with that envelope before it starts mattering in ways you can't manage." Emily reached into her apron and set the envelope on the table between them. She looked at it for a moment, then she broke the seal. Inside were 3 things: a folded letter, a small key with a number stamped into its head, and a photograph she didn't recognize. A photograph of a building, a date written on the back in the same handwriting as the envelope, and beneath the date, an address in Tucson. She read the letter first. It was 2 pages handwritten, and she read it without speaking, without looking up, without changing her expression in any way that would have been readable from across a room. Jack waited. When she finished, she set it down. "He apologizes," she said, "for not making contact earlier, for leaving this to me." She paused. "He says the evidence is stored in a private facility in Tucson. The key opens a box. The box has everything: original documents, financial records, recorded conversations he made during the period when he was still trying to go through proper channels. He says it was enough in year 2. It's 20 years more than enough now." "Who does he say to bring it to?" Jack said. Emily looked at the letter again. "He gives 2 names, a federal prosecutor in Phoenix. He says he spent 3 years vetting someone he believes is genuinely clean, and a journalist at a paper in Tucson who has been trying to investigate the Veterans Fund situation for 4 years without being able to get traction, because she's been missing the specific documentation to make the story hold up in print. He planned this," Jack said, not with surprise, with the specific kind of recognition that comes when you've known someone well and find out after the fact exactly how well they knew themselves. "He planned this very carefully," Emily said, "and then he got sick before he could finish it." "And he gave the finishing of it to you," Jack said. He gave it to someone no one was watching, Emily said. She looked at the key. It was small and ordinary, the kind of key that belonged to a storage locker or a safety deposit box, the kind of key you wouldn't look twice at if you found it in a junk drawer. That was probably intentional. He spent 2 decades making sure that people who wanted this documentation to disappear were watching everyone they thought might have it. He wasn't stupid. He knew his own people could be monitored. He trusted you more than he trusted us, Jack said. It wasn't resentment. It was just a true thing said plainly. He trusted my anonymity, Emily said. That's different from trust in a person. He didn't know me. He knew enough, Jack said. He knew you'd open the door to a parking lot full of men that every person in this town was afraid of because you looked at a face and decided what the face meant rather than what the patch meant. He thought that was worth something. Emily looked at the letter again, at the last line of it, which she hadn't read aloud. She read it now to herself once more, and then she put the letter back in the envelope with the key and the photograph and folded the envelope and put it back in her apron. Jack waited. He said one more thing, Emily said. He said, don't do this alone, but choose who helps you very carefully. Some people who look like they're on the right side aren't. Jack met her eyes. He was talking about you, Emily said. Among others, he said I'd have to make my own assessment. And, Jack said. Emily was quiet for a moment. Through the diner window, she could see the parking lot and the motorcycles, and beyond them, the street where the car belonging to the man in the suit had been and was no longer. You drove here, Emily said. 47 of you, for a funeral, for a man who spent 20 years carrying something that it would have been very easy to put down. You didn't have to honor that. Whatever Michael was to the club didn't owe him this. No, Jack said, we didn't owe him this. But you came anyway, Emily said. Yeah. Emily picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. Then I think I need to understand who Michael was before I decide anything else. Not just what he did, who he was. Because right now I have a key and an address and a letter from a dead man I've never met, and someone is already watching to see what I do with it. And the only thing standing between me and that someone is the judgment of a man I've known for 45 minutes. Jack considered that. All right, he said, then let me tell you who he was. And he did. Michael Brooks had come to the club 17 years ago, not as someone running from the law, not as someone seeking protection in the generic sense, but as someone who had already tried every route that people like him were supposed to try and had found each of them either useless or actively dangerous. Before the club, before Red Creek, before any of it, Michael had worked for a regional contracting firm that held federal government contracts across 3 states. He was not an accountant. He was not a lawyer. He was a logistics coordinator, which meant he tracked where things went, supplies equipment, money, and made sure what was supposed to arrived at the correct destination. What he discovered by accident in the fall of a year, Jack named without hesitation, was that a significant percentage of the money allocated for veterans housing and reintegration support was not arriving at its correct destination. It was being redirected systematically, carefully through a series of shell accounts and subcontractor relationships that had been constructed specifically to be difficult to trace. He had stumbled across it in the most ordinary way imaginable. A spreadsheet that was meant to route to someone else had been sent to him by mistake, and what was in the spreadsheet didn't match anything in the documentation he had for the same period. He had compared them. Then he had compared them again because the numbers were so far off from each other that his first assumption was his own error. He spent 3 weeks going back through everything he had access to before he accepted that the discrepancy was real. He went to his supervisor first. His supervisor told him he was misreading the documents and that the appropriate thing to do was return to his regular responsibilities. He went to his supervisor's supervisor next. He was told the same thing with slightly more pressure behind it. He went to a federal oversight office on a Thursday morning in October, carrying copies of everything he'd accumulated. He told his wife he had a dentist appointment. He didn't tell her where he was actually going because by that point he had begun to understand with the slow, cold clarity of a man who doesn't want to believe what he's understanding, that the people whose money was being taken were not in a position to protect themselves. They were veterans. They were men and women who had already given what they had and come home to a system that had promised to support them and was instead being systematically robbed by the people administering that support. And he couldn't unknow it. That was the thing he kept coming back to in every subsequent telling of the story, Jack said. He couldn't unknow it, and once you've seen something that you can unknow, there are only two kinds of people, the ones who find a way to let it become someone else's problem, and the ones who can't. Michael could not. The first time he went to a federal office, he came out thinking it had gone well, Jack said. He felt good. He thought the system would handle it. He gave them everything he had copies of, kept the originals, and went home and made dinner, and thought it was over. He paused. 4 days later, someone broke into his house. Emily's hands around her empty coffee cup tightened slightly. They didn't take anything valuable, Jack said. They moved things, subtly. Enough for him to know the break-in had happened, but not enough for a police report to take it seriously. A message. He understood it as a message. He didn't stop, Emily said. He didn't stop, Jack said. He went to a second federal office, different city, different jurisdiction. This time he was more careful about how he made contact. He thought he'd been smarter about it. He stopped. His wife's car had its brake lines cut 6 weeks later. She didn't know until she was 2 miles from their house, and the car didn't respond the way it should have. She managed to stop it. She wasn't hurt. Jack's jaw tightened, but she could have been. He left after that, Emily said, not a question. He sent his wife to her sisters across the country without explaining why, told her he had work that required travel, and within 2 weeks he had made contact with us through a man we both knew. Jack spread his hands on the table. He came to us because we were the one organization in his world that those people would calculate as too high profile and too unpredictable to follow him into. He was right. They didn't follow him. And his wife, Emily said. Jack was quiet for a moment. She waited for him for 4 years. Then she stopped waiting. He let her go, Emily said. He had to choose, Jack said, the documentation or the life he had. He chose the documentation because he was the only one who had it and the only one who knew the full shape of what it represented. And he understood that if he went back to his wife and his house and his life, the documentation would eventually be found and destroyed, and the people who had redirected those millions would continue to do so, and the men and women it was taken from would continue to receive nothing. Emily was looking at the table. For 20 years, she said. For 20 years, Jack said. He spent 19 years inside the club doing what we do. I'm not going to tell you the club is a charitable organization because it isn't and you're not a child, but he also spent those 19 years continuing to gather information. Because the network didn't stop, it grew. New contractors, new politicians, new names attached to the same fundamental operation. And every time he gathered something new, he added it to what was in Tucson. And no one in the club knew any of this, Emily said. Jack met her eyes. I knew some of it, not all. He told me what he needed me to know to understand why certain things were the way they were. But the evidence itself, where it was what it contained, that he never told anyone. Until he left it for me, Emily said. Until he left it for you, Jack said. The diner had been quiet for a long time. Outside, some of the men had moved back to their bikes, were talking in small groups. The low sound of their voices coming through the windows without specific words attached. Inside, Darlene had come out from the kitchen at some point and was sitting at the counter with her own coffee and the particular expression of a woman who has heard enough to understand that something important is happening and who has enough wisdom not to involve herself in it unless she's asked. Emily looked at the key on the table. Small, ordinary. The kind of key you could carry for years without anyone asking what it opened. There's something you haven't told me, she said. Jack raised his eyes. The man in the suit, Emily said. He found us quickly, very quickly, which means they already knew Michael's contact was going to be in Red Creek, or they followed you here, or... She stopped. Jack's expression shifted in a way that was small but significant. Or someone in the club told them, Emily said. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It had a specific weight, the weight of a thing that has been known and not said. Michael warned me, Jack said. In the letter, not about anyone specific, but he said that an operation of this size with this many years behind it would have found ways to develop relationships with people in positions adjacent to anyone who might have the documentation. It didn't matter that we were a motorcycle club. It didn't matter that we were outside the usual channels. 20 years is a long time. Money is very good at finding its way to useful places. He thought someone in the club was being paid to report on him, Emily said. He thought it was possible, Jack said carefully. He didn't know who. He said he didn't know who, but he said that's part of why the Tucson location went to you and not to me. Jack's hands pressed flat against the table. He trusted me. I need you to understand that. What I'm telling you is not that he doubted me. He trusted me. But he understood that the only genuinely secure link was one that went directly from him to someone completely outside any network they would have mapped. Emily absorbed that. Then she asked the question that the answer to this was going to determine everything else. How many people knew Michael's letter mentioned my name? Jack was very still. I opened the box alone. I read the letter alone. I came to this town with 46 men who know we're here for Michael's funeral and that there was one final piece of his business to attend to. They don't know what the business is. They don't know your name. 46 men, Emily said, and one of them might be reporting back to the people whose names are in that box in Tucson. Jack said nothing, which was confirmation enough. Emily stood up. She took the envelope out of her apron and held it in her hand for a moment, thinking with the specific, concentrated focus of someone doing rapid calculation under conditions that don't permit error. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer it completely honestly. All right, Jack said. The 46 men outside, Emily said. If you had to choose, not guarantee, just choose how many of them would you put your life on? Jack looked at her steadily. He took the question seriously. He thought about it for what felt to Emily like longer than was comfortable and turned out to be precisely long enough. 38, he said. Without hesitation, 7 more I'd give good odds. One I genuinely don't know. Can you separate them, Emily said. Into groups, Jack said. Without making it obvious, I'm doing it within the next hour, yes. Then here's what's going to happen, Emily said. She said it with the flat, calm certainty of someone who has finished calculating and arrived at an answer, and the answer has removed the uncertainty, but not the difficulty. We're going to the funeral, all of us, because that's what we're here for, and because any deviation from the expected pattern tells whoever is watching that something has shifted. She paused. And while that's happening, you're going to quietly get your 38 men positioned between the key and anyone who doesn't belong. And the one you don't know, Jack said. Let them think they're watching us, Emily said, and let them report back that we're attending a funeral and watch nothing more. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Michael was right about you, he said. He didn't know me, Emily said. No, Jack said, but he knew what he was looking for. Darlene had appeared at the edge of the table, coffee pot in hand, with the expression of a woman who has something to say and has been waiting for the right opening. Emily looked at her. I know about Michael Brooks, Darlene said. Both Emily and Jack went still. Not the way you know about him, Darlene said quickly, reading their expressions. I'm not involved in any of what you're talking about, but Michael Brooks has been through Red Creek before, twice that I know of. She set the coffee pot down on the table. Last time was about 3 years ago. He sat right here at this counter for 2 hours. He had pollen bad coffee, and he left a tip that would have covered a whole family's breakfast. And before he left, he asked me one question. What question? Emily said. Darlene looked at Emily with an expression that combined several things at once. He asked me if the Carter girl was doing all right. He called you that? The Carter girl. I didn't know him, didn't know why he was asking, but he had the kind of face that made you want to answer honestly. So I told him yes, that you were doing it all right, that you were stronger than the situation you'd been handed, and you were making something real out of it. She paused. He said good, and then he left. Emily felt something move through her that she didn't entirely have a name for yet. 3 years ago, she had been 20 working double shifts trying to save enough to get her car fixed and pay 2 months' rent simultaneously. She had been doing all right. She had been barely doing all right, but she had been doing it, and a man she'd never met had driven to the town she lived in to ask a woman at a diner counter whether the daughter of a woman he'd once held the hand of was making it through. She looked at the envelope in her hand. Darlene, she said, is there anywhere in this building that has a safe, an actual safe? Darlene blinked. Under the counter. Been there since 1987. Nobody uses it because the combination's written on a piece of tape on the bottom, and that defeats the purpose, but the safe itself is solid. Can you put something in it for me? Emily said. just for a few hours. Of course, Darlene said without asking what or why, which was exactly the kind of person Darlene was. Emily took the key out of the envelope and held it in her hand for a moment. Then she took the photograph, the one with the address in Tucson, and slipped it into her uniform pocket. The letter she folded and put in the envelope and handed to Darlene. The key she kept. Jack watched all of this without speaking. The letter goes in the safe, Emily said to Darlene. The photograph stays with me. The key stays with me. She looked at Jack. If anyone comes asking, there's nothing here worth finding. What if they don't just ask, Jack said. Then the 38 men you're certain about are going to have a very clear purpose, Emily said. Jack stood. He looked at Emily, really looked at her with the specific evaluating look of a man recalibrating something he thought he understood. How old did you say you were? He said. 23, Emily said. He shook his head. It wasn't dismissal. It was something closer to the recognition you feel when the world surprises you in a direction you didn't anticipate. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to someone Emily couldn't see who, and within 60 seconds there was a shift in the quality of movement outside the diner windows that she could detect without seeing the specifics. Men redistributing without appearing to redistribute. The quiet professional reorganization of people who have learned to move without announcing that they're moving. The service is at 11, Jack said. St. Catherine's on the East Road, you know it. I've been going there since I was 8, Emily said. Something crossed his face at that. Michael chose this town, he said, specifically, not just because you were here. He chose it because he knew it. He'd driven through it more times than you know. He said it was the kind of place that still existed and it was worth protecting. Emily looked at him. He chose it because I was here, she said. Don't soften that. He kept track of me for 20 years, and when he needed to leave something in a place he trusted, he picked the place where I was. That's the truth of it. Yeah, Jack said. That's the truth of it. Then let's go to his funeral, Emily said, and let's do it right. She untied her apron for the second time that morning, hung it on the hook beside the kitchen door, and picked up her jacket from the booth where she'd left it. She checked the key was in her pocket. She checked the photograph was in her pocket. Outside engines were beginning to start, not all of them, just a few, the low beginning of a procession. Emily buttoned her jacket and felt a particular quality of a morning that has moved so far from where it began that the beginning is barely visible from where you're standing. She had walked out of a diner door 2 hours ago and asked a stranger if someone he loved had died. She understood now that the question had only been the first one. Darlene caught her arm as she passed the counter, not to stop her, just to hold her still for 1 second. Be careful, Darlene said. I will, Emily said. I mean it, Darlene said. The Carter girl being all right was very important to that man. Don't make his judgment about you turn out to be wrong. Emily held Darlene's eyes for a moment. Then she nodded once and went through the door. The morning air hit her with the particular quality of late October in Arizona, dry and clear and bright, in a way that didn't account for any of the things that were currently in motion. The motorcycles were lined up in a loose formation, 47 of them, the men astride them or standing beside them, and when Emily came through the diner door, there was a shift, subtle but real, in the collective attention of the group that told her Jack had said something to them. Not much. Enough. She walked to where Jack stood beside his bike, and he handed her a helmet without comment, the way you hand someone something they're going to need for a practical reason without ceremony. She took it. Who rides with who? She said. You are with me, Jack said. Front of the column. Will that be visible to whoever is watching? Absolutely, Jack said. Good, Emily said, because visible meant expected. And expected meant they were still seeing exactly what was supposed to be seen. She put on the helmet. Somewhere behind them, toward the eastern edge of town on a street Emily had known her entire life, a black car was parked with its engine off, and a man inside it who was watching the diner parking lot and deciding what he was looking at. He thought he was watching a girl make a mistake. He was watching something else entirely. St. Catherine's held maybe 200 people on a full Sunday, and it had never in its 40-year history been asked to hold what walked through its doors at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning in late October. The congregation that already occupied the pews, neighbors, townspeople, a few faces Emily recognized from the hardware store and the pharmacy and the post office went collectively still when the first bikers came through the door. Not the frozen, fearful still of the parking lot 2 hours ago. A different kind of still. The kind that comes when you have prepared yourself for something based on everything you have been told about it, and then the thing itself arrives and is different enough from what you prepared for that you don't know how to reorganize immediately. They filed in quietly. That was what nobody had prepared for. 47 men in leather and denim patches on their backs that the entire country recognized, and they came through the doors of St. Catherine's without noise, without swagger, without anything that could be read as performance. They took the pews on the left side without being directed to. Some removed their hats, some didn't, but the ones who didn't were the ones whose hands Emily noticed, the ones whose hands were doing the particular work of men trying to hold themselves together in a small, quiet room where there was nowhere to put the weight of what they were carrying. Emily sat beside Jack in the third pew from the front. The man in the black car had followed at a distance she knew Jack had clocked from the moment they left the diner parking lot. Jack hadn't said anything about it to her. He hadn't needed to. She'd felt a slight adjustment in the column's pace, just slow enough to make the tail comfortable, just consistent enough to look like nothing other than a procession going where processions go. The service was conducted by Father Hendricks, who had been at St. Catherine's for 11 years and who, to his enormous credit, did not visibly register anything unusual about the composition of his congregation. He spoke about Michael Brooks with the specific warmth of a man who had known the deceased personally, which surprised Emily until she did the arithmetic Michael had come through. Red Creek multiple times had known this town had chosen it deliberately. It was possible he had sat in this church. It was possible he had sat in this exact pew. She listened to the eulogy and learned things about Michael Brooks that Jack hadn't told her, not because Jack had withheld them, but because these were the kinds of things a man tells a priest in confidence, and not a club brother over a table. Michael had donated to the food bank in Red Creek for 7 consecutive years, anonymously through a P.O. box in a town 40 miles away. He had funded the repair of the roof at St. Catherine's after a windstorm took a section of it off. He had done this without ever attending a service, without ever identifying himself, without ever asking for acknowledgement. Father Hendricks didn't know until 3 weeks ago who had done these things. Michael had finally told him in a letter sent from a hospital bed when it was clear he was running out of time to leave things in the condition he wanted them. Emily listened to this and felt the shape of Michael Brooks fill out in her understanding. Not as a figure in a story, not as a name on an envelope, but as a specific human being who had made specific choices over a specific number of years and who had understood something fundamental about how to live inside a situation you didn't choose. You carried what you could. You put what you could where it would do some good. You did it without an audience because an audience was not the point. The service lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the men stood and something happened in that small church that Emily would spend a long time afterward trying to find the right words for. The townspeople who had come, she suspected primarily out of curiosity about who would show up, rather than out of knowledge of Michael himself. Those people looked across the aisle at the bikers standing in their pews, and the bikers looked back, and in that shared moment of standing for a dead man's service, there was something that required no translation and no explanation. One of the older townsmen, Roy Garver, who ran the farm equipment supply on the South Road, and who Emily knew had been among the first to lock his doors that morning, Roy Garver extended his hand across the aisle to the man nearest him. The biker looked at the hand, then he took it. Emily saw Jack notice this. She saw what it cost him in the specific way that things cost men like Jack, not in visible emotion, but in the particular stillness that comes over someone when they're pressing something down because now is not the time for it and they know it isn't, but the thing is pressing back. She leaned slightly toward him. He knew, she said quietly. He knew this would happen. That's why he wanted it here. Jack said nothing, but his jaw moved. Outside in the thin October brightness, the men gathered in the church's side lot. Emily stood with Jack and watched the natural sort happening in the group conversations forming and breaking men moving between clusters, and she was watching it with the specific attention of someone cataloging when she saw the man she'd been looking for. She hadn't known she was looking for him until she found him. He was standing slightly apart from the nearest group, not enough to be obvious, but enough. And he was looking at his phone with the particular concentration of someone who was composing a message rather than reading one. He was one of the 46. She had not spoken to him or been introduced to him. He was average in every way that a person can be average when they're working at it. She kept her face neutral and turned to Jack. "Third man from the blue bike," she said, quietly not moving her lips more than necessary. "He's on his phone." Jack did not look. "I see him." "Is that one of your 38?" Emily said. A pause. "No." "The 7, you'd give odds," a shorter pause. "No." Emily let that land. So, Jack said, "how long has he been in the club?" 8 years, Jack said. "His name is Reese. He came in through a chapter in New Mexico. He's been solid." 8 years, Emily said. "That's long enough to be developed by someone patient." "Or he's texting his girlfriend," Jack said. "Is he likely to have a girlfriend?" Emily said. Silence. "Less likely than average," Jack said. They stood there while Reese finished what he was composing and put his phone away and moved back into the nearest group as if he'd never separated from it. Emily said, "We need to move faster than I planned." "The Tucson facility," Jack said. "If he sent our location and a description of what's happening, someone is already calculating their next step." She thought for 2 seconds. "How long is the drive to Tucson?" 2 hours. "And the facility would be open." "It's a private storage operation. They'd be open." Emily said, "If we go as a group, we're visible. 47 motorcycles is not subtle." "No," Jack said. "But if I go alone or with you only, and Reese has told them who to watch." "You don't go alone," Jack said. It was flat, not negotiable. "Then 3, Emily said. "You, me, and one of your 38 that Reese has never had reason to notice." Jack thought, "Danny Reyes, he runs quiet. He and Reese have never been on the same run. Can you get us away from this without it looking like anything?" Emily said. "People go to their bikes after a funeral," Jack said. "It's not unusual to leave in pieces." "Then we leave in pieces," Emily said, "and the rest of the column goes north on Route 9, visible and moving. If anyone's watching from that car, they follow the column." Jack looked at her. "You've thought about this before." "I've thought about it for the last 40 minutes during a church service," Emily said. "I had time." Something that wasn't quite a smile moved across Jack's face. "Give me 4 minutes," he said. He walked toward the group nearest the bikes, moving with a specific, unhurried intention of a man who knows where he's going and has decided how to look while going there. Emily stood by herself in the side lot and let her eyes move over the group without fixing on any one person. She was thinking about the man in the suit from the diner. She was thinking about Reese and his phone. She was thinking about Michael Brooks sitting in a hospital bed composing letters, one to a priest, one to a club, brother, one to a woman he'd never met, trying to close a loop he'd been holding open for 20 years. She was also thinking about her mother, about a woman in a car on a highway, a truck running a light, and a stranger who pulled over and held her hand in a roadside ditch while the ambulance was coming. She was thinking about the fact that her mother had never known who that was, had lived the rest of her life with a debt she couldn't identify and a gratitude she couldn't direct, and had spoken of it sometimes in the particular way people speak about things they can't explain but can't dismiss as evidence that the world occasionally surprised you in the direction of kindness. Her mother had been right. She just hadn't known the half of how complicated the kindness was. Jack came back. At his side was a man Emily hadn't been introduced to, compact, dark-haired, with the self-contained quality of someone who'd spent years learning to take up exactly as much space as necessary and no more above him. "Danny Reyes," Jack said. Danny looked at Emily with an evaluating steadiness that reminded her slightly of the way Jack had looked at her initially. Men who'd survived things by reading people correctly tended to look at new people that way. Not unkind, not hostile, just careful. "He knows what we're doing," Emily said to Jack. "He knows we're going to Tucson and why it matters," Jack said. "Does he know about Reese?" Emily said. Jack looked at Danny. Danny's expression didn't change, but something around his eyes tightened fractionally. "I've had questions about Reese for a while," Danny said. His voice was level. "I didn't have enough to say anything." "You have enough now," Jack said. "I have enough that I'm glad we're not taking him with us," Danny said. They left 4 minutes later, not from the main lot, but from the far end of the side lot, while the column was assembling on the street with the practiced noise of 44 engines starting in sequence, providing exactly the kind of sound and visual that drew attention toward it and away from 3 people leaving in the opposite direction. Emily was on the back of Jack's bike, and they were moving before anyone in the column had reason to wonder where they were. The road south opened up the way desert roads do, long and clear, and absolutely unforgiving of anything moving on it, which means you can see for miles and be seen for miles, which was exactly the problem. We're visible, Emily said close to Jack's ear over the wind. For the first 12 miles, Jack said. Then we take the county road. It's slower, but it's not on anything a city person would know to look at. They rode. Emily kept one hand in her jacket pocket, her fingers around the small key, the metal of it warm now from her body heat. She thought about what was inside, whatever it opened, 19 years of documentation that a man had carried instead of a life, because he decided the documentation mattered more. She thought about the prosecutor's name in the letter and the journalist's name in the letter, and what it was going to mean to hand either of them something that could bring down a financial structure that had been running for 2 decades. She thought about the man in the black car and whether he was following the column north or had been smart enough not to. 22 minutes into the drive, Danny, riding at their left, held up one hand a closed fist. Traffic signal. They were on the county road, the empty one, and the only vehicle in sight behind them was a white pickup that had been there since they turned off the main road. Jack said nothing. He adjusted the mirror. The pickup maintained its distance, not closing, not falling back. Could be nothing, Jack said. Could be, Emily said. They rode for another 6 minutes. The pickup maintained its distance with the precision of something being calculated rather than driven. Not nothing, Jack said. No, Emily said. Danny moved up beside them. He said something to Jack that Emily couldn't hear over the wind. Jack nodded once. They were approaching a crossroads, 2 county roads meeting at a stop sign, open land, on all 4 corners, nowhere to be invisible. Danny split off before the crossroads, his bike angling right, and Emily watched him go and understood what Jack was doing. 2 directions. The pickup would have to choose. It chose the pickup. It followed Jack and Emily straight through the crossroads and continued south. Emily exhaled once. They know where we're going, she said. Or they know who to follow and don't care where we're going, Jack said. Either way, we're not going to Tucson with a tail. Then where, Emily said. Jack said a name. A small town east of the county road, barely a name on the map. He said, there's a man there, name is Warren. He's been our contact in this region for 12 years. He has a property that doesn't exist on a county record because it was registered under a business name that dissolved in 2009. We go there, we let the truck follow us there, and then we stop letting it follow us. What does that mean? Emily said. It means Warren is very good at certain things, Jack said. Emily decided not to ask what thing. They arrived at Warren's property 40 minutes later, having moved through 3 more turns, and the white pickup had stayed with them through all of them. And Emily had spent the last 20 minutes with her hand around the key in her pocket and her mind running through contingencies with the focused clarity of someone who has accepted that being afraid is only useful up to the point where it sharpens your thinking and stops being useful after that. Warren was waiting outside. He was older than Jack by at least 15 years, and he had the kind of stillness that is different from calm, the stillness of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by what the world brought to his door. He looked at the white pickup that had pulled to a stop on the road outside his property line. He looked at Emily, he looked at Jack. How many, he said. At least 2 in the truck, Jack said, possibly coordinating with others. Warren nodded. He looked at Emily again. You're the Carter girl, he said. Emily stared at him. Why does everyone know that? Because Michael told me you might come through here someday, Warren said. He told me if you did to help you the same way I'd help him. He turned toward the truck on the road. Which means right now I'm going to go have a conversation with whoever is in that vehicle and explain some things about the nature of private property in this county while you 3 go through my back gate on the east side, he pointed. There's a truck in the barn. Keys are above the visor. It's registered to a name that does not connect to any of you. It'll get you to Tucson and back. Jack looked at Warren. What are you going to tell the men in the truck? Warren reached into his back pocket and showed the edge of a badge. Not currently active by the look of it, but the kind of thing that takes a long time to lose its effect on people who don't look closely. I'm going to tell them enough, Warren said. He put the badge away. Now move. You've got maybe 4 minutes before they decide to come onto the property instead of sitting on the road. They moved. The truck in Warren's barn was a 12-year-old Ford with a dented rear quarter panel and enough miles on it to look like it had never been anywhere particular. Emily climbed in the passenger side and Jack took the wheel and Danny took the rear seat, and they came out the east gate onto a road that ran parallel to the road they'd come in on. And by the time the men in the white pickup were done with Warren, There was nothing visible in any direction but empty land and a truck that didn't mean anything to anyone who might be looking. Emily unclenched her hand from around the key. "Who is Warren?" she said. "Retired federal marshal," Jack said. "He and Michael had a relationship going back to before Michael came to us. Warren was one of the people Michael tried to go to through proper channels. Warren was the one who finally believed him and tried to help him and got pushed out of his position for it." Emily absorbed that. "So he's been waiting." "For nearly 20 years, Jack said. He's been waiting for the documentation to surface in a way that couldn't be buried again." "That's a long time to wait," Emily said. "Michael asked him to," Jack said. "Runian, Sergeant Bartian." Warren said yes. The drive to Tucson took the remainder of the afternoon, long stretches of quiet, punctuated by moments of conversation that were specific and purposeful. Jack filling in pieces of the structure Emily needed to understand before she opened a box. She'd never seen Danny occasionally adding a detail that Jack had missed or that came from a different angle. Emily listened and asked questions and organized what she heard into a shape she could use. The private storage facility was a low building in an industrial district that looked like exactly what it was, the kind of place that stored things for people who needed discretion without drama. It had no name on the exterior, just an address, and the woman at the desk processed Emily's key number and her identification without comment and took her back through 2 locked doors to a row of private boxes. The box was number 247. Emily put the key in the lock. She held it there for a moment. 19 years. A man's 19 years of careful, costly work, all of it, compressed into whatever was inside this box. She thought about Michael Brooks in a hospital writing letters. She thought about him sitting at Darlene's counter, asking if the Carter girl was all right. She thought about him on a highway pulling over, holding her mother's hand. She turned the key. The box contained 4 things. A hard drive sealed in a static-free bag. 2 manila envelopes bound together with rubber bands, both thick enough to represent years of accumulated paper. And on top of all of it, a single handwritten note, brief, without salutation, without signature. She read it. Then she read it again. "What does it say?" Jack said. Emily looked up. Her expression was not what Jack had expected. It was not relief or satisfaction or any of the emotions he'd been anticipating. It was the particular expression of someone who has just learned that the ground they thought was solid has a different shape than they realize. "He names someone," Emily said. "Someone who has been inside the operation from the beginning. Someone he couldn't name in the letter he left at the diner because he says he didn't know if it was safe for me to have that name until I was here with what's in this box, where denying it would be impossible." "Who?" Jack said. Emily looked at the note again. The name on it was not a contractor. It was not a politician in the conventional sense. It was a federal prosecutor, not the one Michael had recommended she take the evidence to, a different one. A prosecutor who had been part of the original oversight network that Michael had approached in year 2, the second time he tried to go through proper channels, the attempt that had resulted in his wife's brake lines being cut. It was a prosecutor who, according to the note, was still in position, still active, still trusted by the current federal oversight apparatus, and whose name appeared in the documentation not as a victim of the corruption, but as one of its architects. Emily set the note down on top of the envelopes. She looked at Jack. "Michael knew," she said. "He knew who had tried to have him killed. He knew it for 19 years, and he kept building the case anyway." Jack's voice was very controlled. "He never told me." "He couldn't tell you," Emily said, "because if this person knew Michael had identified him, the next step would have been to find out how much the club knew and to move against anyone who might be a liability." "He protected us," Danny said from behind them. His voice was quiet. "By not telling us." The 3 of them stood in a storage facility in Tucson while that particular truth settled into the room. "The prosecutor he recommended to take this to," Emily said. "Michael spent 3 years vetting him. This note says he's clean, but it also says the way we approach him matters. If we walk in the front door with this material, there's enough institutional contact between the offices that the other man will know within an hour. So we don't go through the front door," Jack said. "The journalist," Emily said, "the one he named, she's been working this story for 4 years without the documentation to hold it up. If we go to her first, if the story breaks publicly before the official system has a chance to suppress it, then anyone inside the system who tries to bury the follow-up prosecution has to do it in front of a news cycle that's already running." Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking it through. You publish it first, he said. Then you take it to the prosecutor. So the prosecutor is working under public scrutiny from day one. Michael thought of this, Emily said. The journalist is in Tucson. He put her name in the letter. He put the prosecutor's name in the letter. He put them in that order. She looked at the box. He knew what order they needed to go in. He just needed someone on this end to understand why. How long to reach the journalist? Jack said. Emily pulled out her phone. As long as it takes to find a number. She found it in 7 minutes, a newsroom contact for the Tucson paper, a direct line, a desk number. She called from a phone Jack provided, not her own, a different number, harder to trace back in the time available. The journalist's name was Carol Marsh. She answered on the second ring the way journalists who have been waiting for a call for 4 years answer their phones, with the particular alertness of someone who has learned not to miss something by answering slowly. Emily told her 3 things: that she had documentation on the Veterans Fund diversion, that the documentation included recorded conversations and original financial records going back nearly 2 decades, and that she needed to meet in person within the next 2 hours. There was a silence on the other end that Emily understood. It was the silence of someone running a fast calculation, authenticity, risk, probability, the weight of 4 years of dead-ended work against the possibility that this was real. Where? Carol Marsh said. Emily looked at Jack. Jack said a location. Emily related. 2 hours, Carol Marsh said. I'll be there alone. So will we? Emily said, which was not quite true, but close enough to be useful. She ended the call and stood holding Jack's phone in a storage facility in Tucson, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of a man's 19-year campaign to do one right thing in a world that had made it as difficult as possible, and she understood something that had not been fully clear to her until this exact moment. Michael Brooks had not left this to her because she was exceptional. He had not left this to her because she was brave or clever or particularly equipped for any of this. He had left this to her because she was the person who, in the parking lot of a diner in a small Arizona town, looked at a face that everyone else was looking away from and asked a simple question. He had left it to the person who was paying attention when no one else was. Ready, Jack said. No, Emily said, but let's go anyway. She picked up the hard drive. She picked up the envelopes. She put them in the bag that Jack handed her, and she put the bag over her shoulder, and they walked out of box 247 and through the 2 locked doors and into the late afternoon, and the name of a federal prosecutor who had been running from justice for 19 years was finally in the hands of someone who intended to do something about it. Behind them, the box sat empty under a single light. The key was still in Emily's pocket. She kept it. Carol Marsh was already there when they arrived. That was the first thing Emily registered. Not the location, not the particular quality of the late afternoon pressing down on everything, but the fact that the journalist had beaten them there by enough time to have a coffee in front of her that was already half gone. It told Emily 2 things immediately. Carol Marsh had been close when the call came in, and she had not hesitated for a single minute after hanging up. She was somewhere in her mid-40s with the specific alertness of someone whose entire professional life had been organized around not missing things. She looked at Emily first, then at Jack, then at Danny, standing slightly back, and she made the calculation that anyone would make 3 people, 2 of them, in Hell's Angels leather. And she made it without flinching, which told Emily something important about Carol Marsh's particular kind of courage. You said documentation, Carol said. No greeting, no preamble. What kind? Emily set the bag on the table and sat across from her. Jack and Danny took positions on either side, not threatening but present in the way that made the available space feel defined. Original financial records, Emily said. Account transfers showing systematic diversion of federal funds allocated to veterans housing and reintegration support. 19 years of it. Names, dates, account numbers, the shell company structure used to redirect the money and make it difficult to trace. Carol's hand, which had been reaching for her coffee, stopped. How much money? She said. The note Michael left puts the total at somewhere between $40 and $60 million over the full period, Emily said. The documentation would confirm the specific figure. Carol looked at her with the particular expression of a journalist who has spent 4 years being told a story she couldn't prove and has just been handed the proof. It was not joy. It was not relief. It was a kind of controlled intensity that was more focused and more serious than either of those things. Who is Michael? Carol said. The man who spent 19 years gathering this, Emily said. He died 3 weeks ago. His name was Michael Brooks, and before he died, he made sure this got to someone who could use it. Why you? Carol said, not unkindly, directly. Because I was the only person nobody was watching, Emily said. Carol studied her. Then she looked at Jack. And you, Michael was one of ours, Jack said. We're here to make sure his last piece of business gets finished. Carol picked it up with Charlie, set it down without drinking from it. I've been working this story for 4 years, she said. I've had sources walk away. I've had interviews go quiet overnight. I had a source 18 months ago who had partial documentation and then called me back the next morning and told me he'd made a mistake, that he had nothing, that I should stop pursuing it. She paused. His voice on that second call sounded like a man reading from a script. He was warned off, Emily said. I know he was warned off, Carol said. I just couldn't prove it, and I couldn't prove anything else either, because what I had without the financial backbone was a story with a shape, but no skeleton. She looked at the bag on the table. Is that the skeleton? That's the skeleton, Emily said. Carol reached for the bag, then stopped. She looked at Emily. Before I touch anything in there, I need to understand the exposure. I need to understand who knows you have this, who knows you're here, and what your timeline is. Good questions, Jack said. In order, at minimum, 2 people who work for the network that's been running this operation. They put a tail on us this afternoon that we lost, which buys us some time, but probably not as much as we'd like. Our timeline is tonight because by tomorrow morning, the window for a clean handoff closes. Carol absorbed that the way she absorbed everything completely and without visible shock. You need the story to break before they can suppress the official follow-up. Michael planned it that way, Emily said. Once the story is public, the prosecution becomes visible. Anyone inside the system who tries to interfere with it has to do it in front of a news cycle. That's harder than doing it quietly. Much harder, Carol said. Not impossible, but much harder. She was quiet for a moment, then, there's a name on my list, someone I've never been able to put in print because I could never establish him as anything other than adjacent. He's not a contractor, not a direct financial beneficiary. He's inside the oversight structure. Emily watched her. The reason I could never pin him is that he was involved from the beginning and he helped design the suppression mechanism, Carol said. Every time a legitimate investigation got close, it got redirected. I could see the redirection. I couldn't see the hand doing the redirecting. Because the hand was inside the system doing the redirecting, Emily said. Carol met her eyes. What's in the box, she said. Not the physical box, the storage box. What Michael had left. Emily reached into the bag and produced the note. The last one, the one from inside the box. She slid it across the table. Carol read it. Her expression did not change in any way that would have been readable from across a room. But her hand, when she set the note back down, set it down with a care that said everything about what the name on it meant to her. I've said his name out loud exactly once, Carol said. In my apartment alone, looking at a corkboard after 18 months of work, I said it like a hypothesis. I told myself I was wrong. She looked at Emily. I wasn't wrong. No, Emily said, you weren't. If this documentation puts him in the structure, Carol stopped, started again. This isn't just a story about money taken from veterans. This is a story about a federal prosecutor who helped design a cover-up and has spent 20 years inside the system doing it. Yes, Emily said. Carol picked up her phone. I need to make 2 calls, she said. One to my editor, one to someone I trust inside the federal apparatus who is completely outside this man's jurisdiction and has been for the last decade. We're going to need both. She looked at Jack. How much time can you give me before this location becomes a liability? 90 minutes, Jack said. Carol was already dialing. I'll do it in 60, she said. She moved to the far end of the space they were in and spoke in a low voice that Emily couldn't fully hear, but the quality of the conversation was clear enough from the posture and the pauses and the occasional sharp affirmative syllable. This was not an exploratory call. This was a person who had been waiting for a specific trigger and was now pulling it. Jack moved close to Emily. The tail we lost, he said quietly. I need you to understand what happens if they reacquire us before the story breaks. They come for the documentation, Emily said. They come for all of it, Jack said. The hard drive, the envelopes, the note. If they get any piece of it, their lawyers can argue the chain of evidence is compromised. It doesn't kill the story permanently, but it slows it down enough to give them room to work. So we don't let them get any piece of it, Emily said. We don't let them get any piece of it, Jack said, which means the next 60 minutes have to go perfectly. Emily's phone, her personal phone, which she hadn't used since the diner, buzzed in her pocket. She looked at it, a text from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "We know where you are. Leave the bag and walk away, and this ends tonight." She showed it to Jack. His face tightened in a way she'd learned over the course of the day meant he was doing the same math calculation she was doing. "They don't know where we are," he said. "If they knew where we were, they wouldn't be texting. They'd be here." "They're pushing to see if I'll break," Emily said. "They're pushing to see if you'll move," Jack said. "If you move, they follow the movement." Emily looked at the text again. Then she put her phone in her pocket and sat with her hands flat on the table and did not move. "Then I don't move," she said. Carol came back from her calls. Her energy had shifted, not dramatically, but in the way that energy shifts when a thing that has been potential becomes actual. "My editor is clearing space," she said. "We can run tonight if the documentation holds up. I have a forensic accountant on call who can begin authentication on the financial records within the hour." She looked at the bag. "I need the hard drive and the physical documents. I need to understand what chain of custody looks like." "Michael Brooks acquired all of this personally," Emily said. "The original documents were in his possession continuously from the time of acquisition. The hard drive contains the audio recordings he made during his initial contact attempts with federal offices, recordings he made without informing the other parties, which in Arizona is a one-party consent state, so they're admissible." Carol looked at Jack. "Can you attest to Michael's credibility as a source?" "I can do more than attest," Jack said. "I can give you documentation of his identity and history going back 20 years, including records that establish his position at the contracting firm before he came to us." "I need all of it," Carol said. She looked at Emily. "The prosecution follows the story right. The prosecutor Michael identified as clean is someone you can approach directly once the story is running," Emily said. "His name is in the letter. Michael spent 3 years establishing his integrity before he put him in the letter, and Michael was a very careful man." "The other prosecutor," Carol said, "the one in the note. Once the story runs with his name attached to primary documentation, any move he makes to interfere becomes part of the story," Emily said. "That was Michael's logic. Exposure is the only protection that actually holds." Carol nodded. "I've spent 4 years on this. I know how these suppression mechanisms work. Once the dam breaks," she stopped herself. "Once it breaks fast. The secondary sources who went quiet will start talking again. The trail gets wider, not narrower." "Then we need to not lose this bag in the next 60 minutes, Jack said. Carol looked at him with the directness of a woman who has been in difficult situations and survived them by not pretending they weren't difficult. "Is that a real possibility? That someone tries to take this before we can authenticate and file?" "Yes," Jack said. Carol considered this for exactly 4 seconds. Then she pulled her laptop from her bag and opened it. "Then we start right now," she said. "Authentication, later publication, later. But I need copies of everything in that bag uploaded to our secure server in the next 20 minutes. Physical documents can be disputed or lost. A server in another state with authenticated timestamps cannot be disappeared overnight." Emily unzipped the bag. She handed Carol the manila envelopes first. Carol opened the first one. She was still for a moment looking at what was inside, and then she started working methodically, quickly, with the specific efficiency of someone who has spent a professional lifetime processing large amounts of information under time pressure. She photographed documents with her phone, uploading them as she went. She called her accounting contact and described specific document types so he could begin pulling reference records remotely. She spoke in a shorthand Emily couldn't entirely follow, but the direction of which was completely clear. The hard drive went to a small device Carol produced from her bag, a reader that connected to her laptop. "Forensic copy first," she said. "Original untouched after the copy. That's the only way the recordings are usable." "I know," Emily said, though she hadn't known until Carol said it. Danny, who had been quiet against the wall for most of this, spoke up. "We have a problem." Everyone looked at him. "The tail we lost," Danny said. "I've been looking out every 30 seconds. There's a car that's passed this block 3 times in the last 12 minutes. Make, Jack said immediately. Dark sedan. Can't confirm it's the same car from this afternoon. But 3 passes in 12 minutes on a street that doesn't connect to anything worth passing through means it's either lost or looking. It's not lost, Jack said. He looked at Carol. How long do you need? Carol looked at her screen. Everything uploaded 15 more minutes. Authentication I can do remotely once we're clear. Then we have 15 minutes, Jack said. He looked at Danny. Get me a count the next time it passes. I need to know how many people are in the vehicle. Danny moved back to his position. Jack looked at Emily. When this is over, when Carol files, when the prosecutor has the material, when the names are in print, whoever is in that sedan has no leverage. The destruction of the documentation stops the story for a day, maybe 2. It doesn't stop the authenticated copies already on a server, and it doesn't stop the story once it's filed. They know that, Emily said. Yes, Jack said. So what they're actually doing now isn't trying to destroy the documentation. Emily understood. They're trying to identify everyone involved so they can manage the aftermath. They need to know what they're up against before the story runs, Jack said. Who knows what? Who can testify to what? They need a map of the exposure. So they're watching us, Emily said, because we're the map. And if they can get any one of us into a position where pressure can be applied. Jack didn't finish the sentence. Emily thought about the text on her phone. Leave the bag and walk away. She thought about the journalist 18 months ago who had called Carol back and sounded like he was reading from a script. She thought about Michael's wife waiting 4 years and then stopping waiting. She thought about all the forms that pressure could take and how many of them didn't announce themselves as threats until they were already happening. They're not going to get that, Emily said. Jack looked at her. No, he said, they're not. Danny said from his position, 4 passes now, 2 people in the vehicle. Passenger side has something in his hand. Nobody asked what the something was. The shape of it was obvious enough. Carol, without looking up from her laptop, said 11 minutes. Jack pulled out his phone and sent a message. Emily watched him do it without asking who he was messaging because she had an intuition about who was on the other end, and the intuition was correct. 6 minutes later, the sound came from outside, not one motorcycle, multiple motorcycles. The particular sound of an organized formation arriving at a specific point, which is different from the sound of motorcycles passing through in the way that the sound of running footsteps is different from the sound of walking footsteps. The arrival of purpose. Danny said column is on the block. Jack said nothing. He was watching Carol work. Carol said 7 minutes. Outside, the sedan made a 5th pass, then a 6th. Then it did not make a 7th pass. Emily registered its absence the way you register the absence of a sound you'd been tracking. Not relief because relief was premature, but a slight reduction in the specific pressure that had been building since Danny first called it out. They pulled back, Danny said. Temporarily, Jack said. They're recalculating. That's all we need, Emily said. 7 more minutes of temporarily. Carol said, done. She sat back. She looked at Emily with an expression that combined exhaustion and something that wasn't quite triumph but was adjacent to it, the expression of a person who has just completed something they've been working toward for a very long time and isn't yet sure what to do with the completion. Everything is on the server. Timestamps are authenticated. My editor has access. My accountant contact has the financial records and will have a preliminary authentication within 3 hours. She paused. The story goes to print tonight. Online edition, first physical edition tomorrow morning. Emily exhaled, slowly, completely. There's one more thing, Carol said. She looked at Jack. Michael Brooks. The story is going to name him as the source, as the person who built this. His name is going to be in every major outlet that picks this up within 48 hours of publication, which will be all of them. She paused. I want to make sure the story tells his name right, not as a criminal, not as an outlaw, as a man who spent 20 years doing something genuinely costly because he couldn't do anything else. Jack was very still for a moment. Emily watched his face do the thing it had been doing all day, the specific internal work of a man who carries things without showing them and occasionally gets caught carrying them. Tell it right, Jack said. That's all we're asking. I'll tell it right, Carol said. She started putting her materials away. Emily resecured the physical documents in the bag, the originals which now mattered differently, than they had 2 hours ago now that the copies existed in a form that couldn't be walked out of a room. The hard drive went back into its static bag. Everything went back into the bag, and Emily put the bag on her shoulder, and for the first time since she'd picked it up in a storage facility, the weight of it felt different. Not lighter, but different. Like the weight of something that is no longer a secret. Jack's phone buzzed. He read the message. His expression shifted into something more definite, more operational. "The men outside have moved the sedan," he said. "It went north on the main road. Our people are tracking it." "Is Reese with the main column?" Emily said. "He was," Jack said. "He's not anymore." The word "anymore" sat in the air between them. "Where is he?" Emily said. Jack looked at her steadily. "He made a phone call approximately 40 minutes ago that one of our people was close enough to partially hear. The call was to a number that has since been confirmed as belonging to a law firm in Phoenix that represents two of the shell companies in the documentation." Emily stared at him. "He called them while we were here." "He called them with our location," Jack said, "which means whoever was in that sedan knew exactly where we were." "Then your text was right," Danny said. "They knew. They knew and they held back," Emily said, thinking fast. "Because the documentation was already uploading. Because coming in forcefully while we were in a public enough location with a column of 44 motorcycles outside and a journalist with an authenticated server upload in progress, the calculus was wrong for them. Taking us by force at that point creates more exposure than letting the story run." "They made the same calculation Michael would have made," Jack said. "They're not stupid." "No," Emily said, "they're not." She thought about what that meant for the next 12 hours. What it meant to be holding a bag of original documentation when the people who wanted it had just demonstrated they were capable of identifying her location inside of 40 minutes and were smart enough to know when not to move. "Reese," she said. "What happens to Reese?" Jack's jaw tightened. "That's club business." "I'm not asking for details," Emily said. "I'm asking if he's a continued liability to what we're doing tonight." "He's been separated from the column," Jack said. "He doesn't have a location for where you're going next, and he doesn't know the prosecutor's name." "Does anyone outside this room know the prosecutor's name?" Emily said. Jack looked at her. Danny looked at her. Carol, who was zipping her bag, paused. "Michael's letter," Emily said. "The original letter that's in Darlene's safe back in Red Creek. It has the prosecutor's name in it." The silence lasted 2 full seconds. "We need that letter," Jack said. "Someone needs to go back to Red Creek," Emily said. "Danny," Jack said immediately. He looked at Danny. "You go now. You get the letter from the woman at the diner. You don't stop. You don't explain more than you need to." Danny was already moving. "Darlene will give it to him," Emily said. "Tell him to tell her Emily sent him." Danny was gone before she finished the sentence. The door closing behind him was quiet, which was strange given the speed with which he'd moved through it. Carol stood. She looked at Emily with the expression of someone completing an assessment they've been running throughout an interaction. "You're going to the prosecutor tonight. As soon as we have the letter back and confirmation the story is in the pipeline," Emily said. "The story is in the pipeline," Carol said. "My editor has everything. Even if something happens to me in the next 24 hours, the story runs." She paused. "I've been in this business for 22 years, and I've never said that sentence out loud before." "I'm glad you said it now," Emily said. Carol extended her hand. Emily took it. The handshake lasted a moment longer than most handshakes, the particular duration of one that means more than contact. "Michael Brooks," Carol said. "Tell me one thing about him. One thing that's not in the documents." Emily thought about what Jack had told her, what Darlene had told her, what Father Hendricks had said at the service, what the note inside the box had said in its final line. She thought about a man on a highway pulling over. She thought about a receipt for hospital bills paid in full. She thought about a man sitting at a diner counter asking if the Carter girl was all right. "He checked on people," Emily said. "Even when he couldn't be there, even when being there would have been dangerous, he found ways to check. He needed to know the people he cared about were okay." She paused. "That's not a small thing. Most people in the situation he was in would have had to let go completely. He couldn't let go completely." Carol was quiet for a moment. "That goes in the story," she said. Then she walked out. Jack looked at Emily. They were alone in the space now, the two of them for the first time since the diner that morning. The day had the specific, exhausted quality of something that had moved very fast for a very long time, and had now arrived somewhere that required a different kind of energy. "How are you doing?" Jack said. Emily looked at him. The question was genuine, not procedural, not perfunctory, the kind of question that only gets asked when someone actually wants the answer. "I don't know yet," Emily said. "I think I'll know later. Right now there's still too much that needs to happen." "Yeah," Jack said. "The prosecutor," Emily said. "When Danny gets back with the letter, how long to get to Phoenix?" 2 hours, Jack said. "Same as Tucson." "We need to make the approach tonight," Emily said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight, before anyone who was in that sedan has time to make contact with anyone inside the system." "Agreed," Jack said. Emily's phone buzzed again. The same unknown number as before. This time the text said, "You can't protect everyone involved in this. Think carefully." She read it twice. Then she showed it to Jack. Jack read it. His expression was flat and very controlled. "They're moving to people you care about," he said. "Standard escalation. They can't get the documentation, so they're trying to create leverage through personal pressure." "Darlene," Emily said. She was already dialing. Darlene answered on the third ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. Her voice was steady, which told Emily something important about Darlene. "There's a man sitting in a car outside the diner. He's been there for about 20 minutes. "Don't go outside," Emily said. "I wasn't planning to," Darlene said. "I've been in this town long enough to know when something's wrong." "The envelope in the safe," Emily said. "Is it still there?" "It's still there," Darlene said. "I checked it 10 minutes ago when the car showed up." "Someone's coming to get it," Emily said. "One of the men from this morning. His name is Danny. He'll tell you I sent him. When he comes in, don't make any visible change in what you're doing. He'll come to the counter for coffee, and you'll give him the envelope with his change." "Got it," Darlene said without hesitation. "And the man in the car outside?" Emily looked at Jack. Jack took the phone. "Darlene," he said, "there are 4 of my men parked on the street behind your building. They've been there for the last hour. Nobody is getting through that door who shouldn't." A brief pause from Darlene. Then, "Well," she said, "I suppose I'll make more coffee." Jack handed the phone back. Emily looked at him. "You put men on the diner," she said. "I put men on the diner when we left for the funeral," Jack said. "Because a man I trusted like a brother spent 20 years keeping that envelope safe, and I was not going to let it end in a diner in Red Creek because I didn't put 4 people on the back of the building." Emily was quiet for the moment. She thought about what it meant to plan for things that cost you something, to do the unglamorous, careful, unglamorous again work of making sure the things that mattered were covered before the dramatic moments arrived. "He taught you that," Emily said. "Michael." Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. Emily looked at the bag on her shoulder. She looked at the text on her phone. She thought about what the next 6 hours required Danny getting to Red Creek and back the drive to Phoenix, the approach to a federal prosecutor at night with original documentation of a 20-year conspiracy, the first edition of a newspaper going to digital publications sometime around midnight. She thought about Michael Brooks writing letters in a hospital bed, getting everything into the right shape before time ran out. He would have been good at this part, Emily said, being on this side of it, watching it finally move. Yeah, Jack said. His voice was rough in a way that wasn't about volume. He would have. They stood there for a moment, the length of a breath, no more. And then Emily shifted the bag on her shoulder and said, "Let's go be ready for Danny." And they moved toward the door because there was still everything left to do and the night was getting shorter. Danny made it back from Red Creek in 1 hour and 43 minutes. Emily knew the drive should have taken at least 2 hours each way, which meant Danny had made choices about speed that she decided not to think too carefully about. He came through the door with the envelope in his jacket, handed it to Emily without sitting down and said, "The man in the car outside Darlene's left about 20 minutes after I got there. Your 4 guys on the back of the building walked him off." "He go quietly," Jack said. "He went," Danny said. "That was enough." Emily opened the envelope, the original letter from Michael, the one Darlene had kept in the safe under the counter with the combination written on tape on the bottom. She read through it again, not because she'd forgotten what it said, but because the prosecutor's name needed to be in her mouth and her memory, and not only on paper before she walked into whatever the next 2 hours were going to be. His name was Thomas Garrett. He had been an assistant U.S. attorney in Phoenix for 11 years. Michael's letter described him in terms that were specific and methodical, Not enthusiastic, not hopeful, but the way you describe a person you have spent real time studying and have arrived at a careful conclusion about. He coaches youth baseball on Saturday mornings, Michael had written. He drove the same truck for 9 years before the transmission went. His wife teaches third grade. I have watched a man's life for 3 years, looking for the place where money or pressure or fear bent him, and I have not found it. Emily folded the letter. Let's go, she said. The drive to Phoenix was exactly 2 hours on the roads Jack took, and they spent most of it in the specific silence of people who have said what needed to be said and are now conserving something for what comes next. Danny drove. Jack sat in the passenger seat. Emily sat in the back with the bag across her lap and her hand resting on it, the way you rest your hand on something you've been responsible for long enough that the responsibility has become physical habit. Somewhere around the 40-minute mark, Jack's phone rang. He looked at the screen and answered it immediately. The call lasted 90 seconds. Emily watched his posture during it, the quality of his stillness, the single tight exhale through his nose, at one point the way his hand pressed slightly harder against the door panel. He ended the call. That was Warren, he said. Emily waited. The two men in the white pickup from this afternoon, Jack said. Warren made contact with a federal marshal he's been in touch with since his own time in the service. The men in the truck have been identified. One of them is a private investigator connected to the law firm that represents the shell companies. The other one, he stopped. The other one, Emily said, is a former federal agent, Jack said. Terminated for cause 8 years ago. He's been doing private work since then for clients who need someone who knows how the official system moves. He paused. Warren's contact ran his history. He was originally hired by the same law firm in 2019, around the same time Carol Marsh was getting close enough on her story that someone decided professional surveillance was worth the investment. They've been watching this for years, Emily said, not just reacting to today. They've been watching anything that moved toward the documentation for years, Jack said. Michael knew that. It's part of why he was so careful about the Tucson location. He expected that when the time came, the people who wanted this buried would already have people in place. And Reese was one of those people in place, Emily said. Reese was developed over time, Jack said. We don't know when exactly. We know he's been communicating with that law firm for at least 14 months. 14 months. Emily thought about that. She thought about what it meant to be inside a group of people and be doing something that would destroy what the group was built on for 14 months, and what kind of person that required you to be, and what kind of money or pressure or fear made someone become that person. What happens to him? Emily said. Jack was quiet for a moment. That's already being handled, he said. What I can tell you is that he's not going to be a problem after tonight, and that the handling of it is something Michael would have approved of. Emily didn't push further. She understood the borders of what was hers to know and what wasn't, and she'd understood them since the morning. They reached the outer edge of Phoenix at 9:47 in the evening. Danny pulled off on Jack's direction, and they sat in a parking lot while Jack made 2 calls, one to confirm Thomas Garrett's home address, which Warren had obtained through channels. Emily was confident were both effective and entirely off the grid, and one to the column, which had moved south from Red Creek after the funeral and was currently staged at a rest stop 40 minutes north of the city. Why the column? Emily said. Because we're delivering original documentation of a federal conspiracy to a federal prosecutor at his home at 10 o'clock at night, Jack said. And because if the people who've been watching this all day decide the moment we're walking up a residential driveway is the moment to make their move, I want them to make that calculation knowing what's behind us. Emily looked at him. You're not worried about how it looks 44 motorcycles outside a prosecutor's house. I'm more worried about you not making it to the door, Jack said. She didn't have an answer for that was better than the one he'd already given. Thomas Garrett opened his front door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, which told Emily he'd been home for a while and had been in the middle of something ordinary when they rang the bell. He looked at Emily, he looked at Jack, he looked at Danny on the step behind Jack. His expression moved through several things in rapid succession: confusion, wariness, the specific recalibration of a man whose evening has just become something categorically different from what it was 30 seconds ago. Mr. Garrett, Emily said, my name is Emily Carter. A man named Michael Brooks left something for you. He asked me to bring it to you personally. Garrett's expression stopped moving. It went still in the way that faces go still when a name lands that carries 20 years of weight behind it. Michael Brooks, he said. It wasn't a question. You know who he was? Emily said. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Jack. Who are you? Jack Walker, Jack said. Michael was my brother. Garrett took his glasses off. He folded them in his hand. He looked at the bag on Emily's shoulder. Then he stepped back from the door and held it open. Come in, he said. They sat at his kitchen table. Garrett, Emily, Jack, and Danny stayed near the door with the same quiet self-containment he'd maintained all day. Garrett's wife appeared briefly at the edge of the kitchen, read the room with the quick accuracy of a woman who has been married to a federal prosecutor for 15 years and disappeared without saying anything, which Emily thought demonstrated a very specific kind of intelligence. Emily put the bag on the table. She opened it. She set the physical documentation in front of Garrett. The envelopes, the hard drive, the notes, and she talked him through it in the order it needed to be understood who Michael had been. What he'd witnessed, what he'd spent 19 years building, and why it was here tonight instead of through official channels in the morning. Garrett listened. He did not interrupt. He picked up individual documents and looked at them without reading them fully, the look of a man taking the measure of a thing before he commits to the specifics. He held the hard drive for a moment without opening the bag it was in. When Emily finished, the kitchen was quiet. Garrett set the hard drive down carefully. He looked at Emily. The other prosecutor, he said, the one Michael identifies in the note. Yes, Emily said. He's a colleague, Garrett said. I've known him for 7 years. He has the respect of virtually everyone in this office. I know, Emily said. Michael spent 3 years figuring out why that was and what it meant. Garrett was very still. What did Michael determine it meant? That he was very good at his grade and very careful about his exposure, Emily said. That the people who were running this operation had chosen him specifically because a prosecutor with a genuine reputation was harder to investigate than one who already had question marks. Garrett set both hands flat on the table. Emily had seen Jack do the same thing at the diner that morning. It was the gesture of a man grounding himself physically while doing something difficult internally. If I move on this, Garrett said, he will know within 24 hours, probably within 12. The story runs tonight, Emily said. Carol Marsh at the Tucson paper. By the time morning editions are out, his name is in print with documentation attached. Any move he makes after that is visible. Garrett looked at her. You already went to a journalist. Michael planned it that way, Emily said. Publication first, official channel second. He understood that the official channel was the vulnerable point. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Emily let him be quiet. She had learned today over and over that rushing the silences of people who were doing real thinking was the fastest way to get a worse answer. He always was a step ahead, Garrett said finally. Not about her, about Michael. It was the voice of a man who had thought about Michael Brooks more than once over the years and had had complicated feelings about the thinking. You knew him, Emily said. It wasn't in the letter. Garrett looked at her. I knew of him. When the original reports came through, the ones from his first 2 contact attempts with federal offices, his name crossed my desk. I was junior enough at the time that I wasn't making decisions about it, but I saw it. And then it disappeared. He paused. I asked about it once. I was told the situation had been resolved and there was nothing actionable. I was 29 years old and junior enough to accept that answer. He looked at the documentation on the table. I've thought about it since. More than I'd like to admit. He didn't blame the system entirely, Emily said. He understood that the people who buried it were inside the system, not the system itself. That's generous, Garrett said. He was a generous man, Emily said. Considerably more generous than the situation warranted. Garrett picked up the first envelope again. He opened it this time. He read the first 3 pages of what was inside and the quality of his attention changed. It became the focused, absorptive attention of a lawyer, reading a document that is going to restructure a significant portion of what he thought he understood. This is going to take time to prosecute correctly, he said without looking up. Months, possibly longer. We know, Jack said. Michael knew. He built it to be thorough enough to hold up regardless of how long it takes. Garrett looked up. He looked at Jack directly the first time since they'd sat down that he'd given Jack his full attention rather than his peripheral attention. The club, he said, the Hells Angels. Michael was with you for 19 years. Yes, Jack said. And in that time, Garrett said, this documentation was never used for anything other than what you're holding, Jack said. His voice was flat and direct. Michael was with us because he needed to be somewhere they wouldn't follow him. We gave him that. What he built while he was there was his. We didn't know the specifics, and we didn't ask. Garrett held Jack's eyes. I'm going to have to ask that more formally, he said, at some point. At some point, Jack said, we'll answer it. Tonight we're answering the thing that's been waiting 20 years. Garrett nodded. He looked at Emily. You're going to be a witness in this, he said. The chain of custody runs through you. That means your name goes on record. I know, Emily said. That means the people who have been trying to suppress this documentation will know your name officially, Garrett said. Not just that you exist. They already know I exist, Emily said. They've been sending me texts for the last 4 hours. Garrett blinked. Show me, he said. She showed him the 2 texts. He photographed them with his phone. His expression when he looked up from the phone was the expression of a prosecutor who has just received evidence of witness intimidation, and the particular quality of focus that came into his eyes was something Emily found in the specific circumstances of that moment deeply reassuring. Tonight, Garrett said, I'm going to make 3 calls, one to a colleague in the FBI field office here who I trust and who has no professional intersection with the man in these documents, one to the Marshal Service, and one to the presiding judge in this district who has been on the bench long enough that she's outside anyone's sphere of influence and who I know personally. He paused. By morning, there will be a protective order on you on everyone in this room and on Carol Marsh and her publication. It's not a guarantee, but it changes the calculation for anyone thinking about escalating. Do it, Emily said. Garrett stood. He looked at the documentation spread across his kitchen table, years of a man's life, laid out on a surface usually occupied by dinner plates and homework, and the ordinary mess of a family living in a house. He looked at it with the expression of someone who understands the weight of what they're picking up. I want to say something, Garrett said. He was looking at Jack. Off the record, before I make those calls. Jack waited. Michael Brooks should have been protected, Garrett said. The first time he walked into a federal building with what he had there should have been someone capable of protecting him. There wasn't. And what that cost him, he stopped. I can't fix that, but I want you to know that the people in this room tonight understand what it cost. Jack said nothing. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was holding something down, because the alternative was letting it surface in a kitchen in Phoenix in front of a federal prosecutor, which was not the right place. Emily said quietly, he knew the cost when he chose it. He didn't choose wrong. Garrett looked at her. He nodded once. Then he took his phone and went to make his calls. The 3 calls took 41 minutes. Emily sat at the kitchen table and listened to the muffled sound of Garrett's voice from the next room. Not the words, just the rhythm and tone of it. 3 separate conversations, each with a different quality, each requiring a different kind of persuasion. The second call was the longest. The third was the shortest and had a single moment near its end where Garrett's voice went sharp and brief and then settled back into something more controlled, which Emily interpreted as the moment where the judge said yes. When he came back, his face had the particular clarity of someone who has committed to something difficult and is now past the decision point. It's in motion, he said. The protective orders will be filed when the court opens in the morning. The FBI contact is sending 2 agents to your location tonight for your safety and to establish chain of custody on the physical documentation. He looked at Emily. They'll need you to be somewhere stable for the next 6 to 8 hours. Where? Emily said. Here, Garrett said. If you're willing. Emily looked at Jack. Jack said, I'll stay. Danny takes the truck. Emily looked back at Garrett. All right, she said. The 2 FBI agents arrived 40 minutes later. They were professional and thorough and treated the documentation with the specific procedural care that told Emily they understood what they were handling. The chain of custody form she signed had her name in full and her address in Red Creek in the date and time, and when she signed it, she felt the particular finality of something that has crossed from being carried quietly to being part of an official record that could not be made to disappear overnight. At 12:17 in the morning, Carol Marsh's story went live on the paper's website. Garrett's phone lit up with a notification and he showed it to Emily without comment. The headline was direct and unambiguous and contained 3 names, the 2 primary architects of the shell company structure and the federal prosecutor who had helped design the suppression mechanism. Carol had written it the way she'd promised to write it thoroughly, with documentation cited at every point with Michael Brooks, named at the top as the source who had spent 19 years building the case that made the story possible. Emily read the first 3 paragraphs. She read the paragraph about Michael. Carol had written it right. She handed the phone back to Garrett. Jack was looking at his own phone. He showed her the screen, a text from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out to be one of the men in the column who had apparently been monitoring news feeds. The text said simply, "It's running." And then 20 seconds later, another text from the same number, which said he'd have liked this. Jack put the phone away without responding. He sat back in Garrett's kitchen chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and Emily looked at him and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that was better than silence right then. And she had learned that lesson in the specific way you learn lessons that have been taught by watching someone grieve something real. At 2 in the morning, Garrett's colleague from the FBI called to inform him that the 2 men from the white pickup had been brought in for questioning. The private investigator had lawyered up immediately. The former federal agent, after 45 minutes in a room with 2 FBI agents who had spent the previous hour reading through 20-year-old suppression records with his name adjacent to several entries, had begun talking. At 3:15, the prosecutor whose name was in Michael's note, the man who had spent 20 years inside the federal system, managing a corruption architecture from the inside called Garrett's personal cell phone. The call lasted 8 seconds. Garrett did not tell Emily and Jack exactly what was said on the call, but he told them that his colleague at the FBI had been notified and that the caller's passport had been flagged within the hour. He wasn't going anywhere. At 4:40 in the morning, Emily was sitting at Garrett's kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold when the first major national outlet picked up Carol's story, then 2 more within minutes of each other. By 5:30, there were 11. By 6, it had cleared the threshold. That meant it was no longer a regional story that could be managed quietly. It was a national story with documentation attached, named sources, and a federal prosecution already confirmed to be in motion. And the only thing left to do with it was let it run. Jack showed her his phone at 6:15. The column had been tracking the story from their rest stop, 40 men reading the same thing at the same time on 40 different phones, and someone had taken a photograph not of anything dramatic, just of the group sitting together in the early morning. Most of them looking at their phones, a few looking at each other, and the photograph had a quality to it that Emily couldn't fully articulate, but that she recognized. It was the quality of people who have come to the end of something long and are sitting in the particular silence of that arrival. She thought about Michael seeing that photograph. She thought about what he would have felt. She decided he would have felt that the cost was worth it. Not easily, not without the full weight of everything it had taken, but worth it. At 7 in the morning, Garrett made arrangements for Emily to be driven back to Red Creek with a 2-agent escort, which she accepted because it was practical and not because she was afraid. She shook Garrett's hand at his front door, and he held the handshake for a moment and said, "This is going to take a while to get all the way through." "I know," Emily said. "You'll be called to testify," he said, "possibly more than once." "I'll be there," Emily said. She got in the car with the 2 agents and watched Garrett's house grow smaller through the rear window, and then watched Phoenix grow smaller, and then it was desert again, and the morning light coming across it sideways the way October morning light does in Arizona. Jack rode behind them most of the way north. She could see his bike in the mirror, steady and unhurried, and somewhere behind him, she knew the column would be moving too. 44 bikes folding back toward wherever they'd come from, their business in Arizona finished. They reached Red Creek at 9:20 in the morning. The 2 agents waited while Emily went inside the diner. Darlene was behind the counter. She looked at Emily the way she'd been looking at her for 7 years, the way a person looks at someone they've watched grow up in pieces in the particular small increments of a small town, one season at a time. She did not say anything about the story that had been running on every news feed since midnight. She did not say anything about the night. She just reached under the counter and produced a cup of coffee and set it in front of the first stool and looked at Emily. Emily sat down. She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Okay," Darlene said. "Yeah," Emily said. "Okay." They sat like that for a few minutes, not long, just enough. The diner had 3 other customers, and the sound of the grill from the back, and the particular ordinary quality of a morning that was going to proceed normally regardless of what had happened the night before. Because mornings in Red Creek proceeded normally, and that was one of the things that made Red Creek worth coming back to. The sound of motorcycles reached them before the bikes were visible. Not 44, just one. Emily heard it pull into the lot and stop, and she didn't turn around on the stool, just listened, and a minute later the door opened, and Jack came in and sat down on the stool beside her. Darlene put a cup in front of him without being asked. He looked at Emily. She looked at him. "Column's heading north," he said. "I told him I'd catch up." "You didn't have to stay," Emily said. "I know," Jack said. They drank their coffee. After a while, Jack said, "There's going to be a memorial for Michael. A real one, not like yesterday, when the dust settles, when the case is in the hands of people who can take it the rest of the way." He looked at his cup. "I'd like you to be there." Emily thought about a man she'd never met who had spent 20 years making sure she was okay from a distance, who had held her mother's hand in a ditch on a highway, who had paid a hospital debt anonymously and kept the receipt as a reminder, who had driven through Red Creek and sat at this counter and asked Darlene if the Carter girl was all right and gotten in his car and driven away satisfied that she was. "Where?" Emily said. "Haven't decided yet," Jack said. Somewhere that meant something to him. He paused. He mentioned Red Creek more than once, in passing, the way people mention places that have taken up space in them without their permission. Emily looked at the counter, at her coffee cup, at her own hands around it. "Then here," she said. "He can have it here." Jack nodded. Outside, the morning was doing what Arizona mornings do, moving from clear and sharp into the particular bright warmth that erases edges and makes the whole world look slightly more permanent than it probably is. The two FBI agents were still in their car, in the lot, patient and professional. Emily was thinking about something that had been sitting in the back of her mind since Garrett's kitchen. Something she hadn't said out loud yet because there hadn't been the right moment for it, and she wasn't sure the right moment was now, but it was going to have to be said at some point, and the person she needed to say it to was sitting next to her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah," Jack said. "When this is over," Emily said, "when the case is through and the testimony is done and Michael's name is cleared officially and publicly, what does the club do?" Jack looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean—" She stopped, found the words. "Michael spent 19 years inside the club, and the club didn't know everything he was doing, but you knew some of it. You covered for him. You gave him the space to do it. You came here for his funeral when you could have sent 2 people and nobody would have thought less of you." She paused. "And none of that is going to be in the prosecution records. None of it is going to be in Carol's story in a way that shows the whole picture." Jack looked at his coffee. "That's not why we did it." "I know," Emily said. "That's exactly why I'm asking. What do you do when it's over?" Jack was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of someone saying something true that they haven't necessarily said out loud before. "We go back to being what we are," he said, "which is complicated, which has always been complicated. Michael knew what we were, and he chose us anyway, which I think says something, not that we're saints, but that the complicated version of something real is sometimes more useful than the simple version of something ideal." He looked at her. "The world runs on who shows up, not who looks right on paper." Emily thought about that. She thought about a parking lot, 47 motorcycles in a town that had locked its doors, and a 23-year-old waitress who had looked at a face and decided the face meant something different from what everyone else was reading. She thought about how the entire chain of events that had followed the storage box, the journalist, the prosecutor, the protection orders, the story running in 11 national outlets before 6 in the morning, all of it had started because she hadn't looked away. "He was right about you," Emily said. "Michael, he said in the note, don't do this alone, but choose carefully. He thought you were worth choosing." Jack said nothing for a moment. Then, "He had better judgment than most people I've known." "Yeah," Emily said. "He did." The door opened and Roy Garver came in, the farm equipment man, who had been the first to lock his door that morning and had been the first to extend a hand across the aisle at St. Catherine's. He stopped when he saw Jack at the counter. The moment held its shape for 2 full seconds. Then Roy pulled out the stool on Jack's other side and sat down. Darlene, without a word, put a cup in front of him. Roy looked at his coffee. Then he looked at Jack. "I heard the news this morning," and he said, "what you all were part of." Jack said nothing. He let the man find his way to what he was going to say. "I owe you an apology," Roy said, "and I owe it to the men who rode in here yesterday. I know most of them are gone now, but I owe it." "You don't," Jack started. "I do," Roy said. He said it firmly, the way a man who has thought about something all night and arrived at a clear position says a thing. "I locked my door. That's what I did, and whatever I believe I was doing it for the truth is I didn't look. I just reacted. He looked at Jack. Your man Michael spent 20 years trying to do right by people nobody else was looking at. The least I can do is look. Jack looked at Roy Garver for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Roy took it. Emily watched this and felt something that she had been feeling in pieces all day finally settle into its complete shape, not neatly, not without the full weight of everything it had cost to get here, but completely. The way things settle when they are actually done. 6 months later, the primary prosecution filed 47 counts across 9 defendants, including the federal prosecutor whose name had been in a storage box in Tucson for 19 years. The charges included conspiracy wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and the knowing diversion of federal funds designated for veterans support programs. Thomas Garrett led the prosecution team. Carol Marsh covered every hearing. The case generated more than 200 news articles in its first 3 months and prompted a congressional investigation into the oversight structure that had allowed the diversion to run for 2 decades. Michael Brooks was formally exonerated of the suspicions that had been quietly attached to his name, inside federal records, the informal designations that had been placed there by people who needed him to look like a problem rather than a witness. His name cleaned went into the public record as the source who had made the case possible. At his memorial held in Red Creek on a Saturday morning in March, when the weather had turned just enough to be bearable, 43 men came. Some of the same men who had filed into St. Catherine's in October, some new faces. Father Hendricks said the words. Darlene made enough food for twice the number of people present. Roy Garver came. He brought 4 other men from town with him, men who had locked their doors in October and had spent the intervening months renegotiating what that meant about them. Emily stood at the front of the small gathering and said what she had to say, which was not long, but which she had thought about carefully enough that every word carried its weight. She said, "A man I never met decided I was worth keeping track of. He never asked for anything from me. He never introduced himself. He just checked from a distance to make sure I was okay, because he'd once been present for the worst moment of my mother's life, and he couldn't unknow that, and it mattered to him that what came after went well." She paused. He spent 20 years carrying something that most people would have put down. He put it down in the only way he could accept, by finishing it. That's the whole story. That's who he was. Jack, standing to the side, looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked up, and his eyes, when they came up, were clear in the way that eyes are clear after something long and difficult has finally arrived at its end. When the memorial was over, the men walked to their bikes in the quiet way of people leaving a place that has done what it needed to do. Emily stood outside the diner and watched them go one by one until the last engine faded out on Route 9 and Red Creek settled back into the particular silence of itself. Darlene came and stood beside her. "You know," Darlene said, "most people in this town still can't quite decide what to make of all this." "I know," Emily said. "But they're thinking about it," Darlene said. "That's different from before." Emily looked down the empty road where the motorcycles had gone. She thought about Jack's hands on the table at the diner. She thought about a storage box in Tucson and a key that had been warm from her body heat. She thought about a woman on a highway afraid and in pain, and a stranger who pulled over and held her hand and then spent the rest of his life trying to make good on the moment. She thought about what it meant to look at something everyone else was looking away from and decide it deserved your full attention. Some people move through the world, leaving almost no visible mark, no public record, no ceremony, no monument with their name on it, and yet the world is measurably different because they were in it. Michael Brooks was that kind of man. He had worked in the dark for 2 decades and trusted the light to come from somewhere else, from someone who would pick up what he left and carry it the rest of the way. He had been right to trust it. He had been right about the Carter girl. And Red Creek, which had once heard fear in the sound of engines on Route 9, now heard something it hadn't heard before, the knowledge that the people who look the most like danger are sometimes the ones carrying the heaviest load of decency, and that the whole careful architecture of a better outcome can rest on one person willing to walk across a parking lot and ask a simple question. Emily Carter had asked that question. Everything that followed was the answer.